It's a great pleasure to be here. So thank you for inviting me. So I'll talk about our company and how we came to be where we are, and probably from a totally different perspective than what John and Paul were presenting, which is, as Louis was mentioning initially, we're kind of started from bootstrap method, and I'll talk a little bit about that, and then include what are the pros and cons of that approach, what has worked, what hasn't worked, and what can we learn from that, and present that as perhaps a valid option of starting a company. Okay, so basically I'll talk about how Baylis got introduced, talk about our startup process, how we generated growth capital to grow our business, and they kind of look at the anatomy of organically grown financed growth company, how it came about as opposed to raising external capital. So I don't know if you can see the whole thing. We actually started in 1986 as importer and distributor of specialized medical devices in Canada. So we've been around 25 years. So that's already one major factor. You should keep in mind that John and Paul were talking starting in 2008 and 2009 timeframe. So this is a very long-running process. It's not a short process. So we started in '86. We were importing products mainly from US and France and distributing them in Canada. So we started with a very low-end product. We actually, one of the first sales we had was actually John's brother, who was a cardiologist in Hamilton. So one of the first customers we sold our products to, believe it or not. So it's a good kind of ending to that story. So we started with that, and which is essentially a service business, because you're buying products, you're adding expertise in terms of regulatory approvals, sales, and collection processes, but there's no capital required. Okay? So it's a good business because it doesn't require capital, and it can be a very profitable business. So it does generate cash that you can use and have a good life and grow your business. But it's also not a very good long-term viable model. And there's several reasons that come in for that. First is if you're a good distributor, and you're doing really good, so you go and knock the ball out of the park, you're selling really good, and the company you're selling for will realize that and say, look, we don't need Baylis or company ABC, we can go direct and save the margins that they're making. So if you're really good, you're going to knock yourself out of business eventually. And if you're not good, you're not selling, then you'll be out anyways. And in medtech business, third thing happens is that if technology is good and you're selling good in Canada, chances are they're also doing good in Germany and Italy and US, then some other big company is going to come see that and take that company out. So for instance, if the company gets bought out by Medtronic, they no longer need Baylis or someone else. They already have the sales force in Canada. So we started in '86, and up until 2000, or even till now, this has happened to us at least 4 times, where we build up the business, then it goes down. And you pick up another product line, you work hard at it, and build up again, then it goes down again. So it's kind of the cycle that happened to us at least 3 or 4 times. And then we realized that it's a good business, but it's not a good long-term business. You can't steadily go up and grow up the food chain. You're going up and down, and not a good viable model, at least for us, what we wanted to achieve at that stage. So in 1985, we started to develop accessories for one of the products we sold here. So one of the companies we sold for didn't have these particular radio frequency needles that were required in the marketplace at that time. So we said, well, we were selling the capital equipment. We said, we'll develop this and start selling that. So we actually developed in 95 to say, and launched in 98. So at that time, we knew how to sell a product, but we had no idea about how to engineer it, how to get regulatory approvals. And we had no engineers, so just Frank and myself, my partner, myself, and one salesperson, and a little bit of regulatory help in Canada. So we basically learned from scratch. I can remember getting books on FDA approval process, reading that, and talking to consultants, and we had no money to hire engineers or consultants. We had to start from ground zero, basically learn all of that, and get that approved. So it is feasible to do that, as Paul was alluding, if you put enough engineering, if you put enough resources at trying to make that happen. So we launched that in '98. Then subsequent to that, we took the profit from sales of those products and developed more complex systems. So by 2002, we had a series of 2 major product lines which we launched in US, one for chronic pain management and one for radiology. Radiology one didn't do as good as our pain management, which we ran with subsequently. Then from 2002, when we had a total of 6 employees when we first launched our product, to 2010 now we have roughly 140 employees. We sell in over 60 countries. We have offices in Montreal, Toronto, Calgary, Vancouver, and so on. And in 2009, one of the product lines that we had started in 2002 was purchased by Kimberly-Clark. So we did a divestiture at that time, and then we continued to run the rest of the other products and invest in R&D to develop further products. So that's been kind of our story in that sense. And so when I kind of take a look at it, throughout the process, the company was financed inherently by organic means, so meaning that we sold something, we made profit, we invested that in R&D or some development or manufacturing, whatnot, sold that product, took profit, and started again. So it was like an organically growth process. We had no external capital. We did make extensive use of the programs that Paul mentioned. SHRED was an extremely critical part of that, as well as HTX in later days, IRAP, OC, which came about later on, and some of the programs that are in place in 90s in earlier times. So they were a critical part of us financing it and so far, but we didn't source external either debt market or equity market. So at startup, sweat equity of partners, as founder was kind of the key driver to make that happen. In early stages, revenue from distribution business was used to finance our business, which in turn financed development and commercialization of more complex products, which in turn financed other part. You can see how the snowball effect kind of took place. So it requires you to start with something, generate some sales, use a profit to do something, and not necessarily take the money out. You have to continue to reinvest as you live on that. So the lessons learned from this process that we can impart on is that, first of all, it forces you to learn business from ground up. Okay, you're actually selling something to someone. So if you look at the chart that Paul had, can you sell something to the customer? So that chart becomes intuitive to you, as in, can this product be sold at the price that you want to ask, and what would it take to sell that? What kind of evidence would a physician need, or hospital administrator need, or biomedical engineer need to get this product installed for you to actually make some money or collect some revenue from that? It teaches you how to work with physicians in a meaningful way to articulate a story and get them to buy something. It's one thing to say, this looks interesting, we'll talk about it, or we could buy it. It's another thing to say, here's $1,000 for a device, $100,000 for a piece of equipment. So sales is a very validating process and teaches you how to do that in an effective manner. Allows you to build a relationship with physicians, administrators, biomedical engineers that can be helpful as you develop your own product, because now you know how to approach them, what the issues they will be looking at, and how to get that going. And if you look at in a kind of early growth stage as we started developing products, you learn how to engage physicians in a meaningful way. What I mean by that is on one of the slides Paul had, or someone had, was the concept of the clinical value that you need to add. So you learn what is the clinical value someone is looking for, whether in terms of time saving or the efficacy, and how to articulate that. Meaning that you need to put ads in newspapers, or you need to write clinical papers that could be published, or you need key opinion leaders. Which leaders will do better in what area? Perhaps you need German leaders to speak in Germany or whatnot. So you learn kind of the business from ground up from there. The other part which sometimes get missed is that by seeing companies that are distributing for, you get to see how device development and manufacturing process actually happens. Because you're selling for a company out of Florida, for instance, they'll invite you to go visit them. You can see how the processes are. You can speak to the regulatory experts or the manufacturing. You can learn quite a bit from them, and most companies are willing to give you a little bit of time and help you out as need be. So in early stages, when we had like 98, when we wrote our first, in the US called 510K approval process, which we had no knowledge of, and I was personally writing it, and I was able to draw upon at least 4 different companies we sold for, and say, can you look at this, tell us what you think, and they were gracious enough to give us some time, give us some pointers on what to do. It was a critical help at that time to get us going. Similarly, a lot of our engineering process were actually borrowed from a company called Pruka Engineering that we sold for. They have very good engineering processes. We kind of developed it and then adopted it for our use. Then if you look at what in longer term, what's happened, and we've been at this for 12 years now, is that because of you haven't generated external capital, you haven't diluted yourself, so the founders can retain control of the corporation in a meaningful way. And the second thing is you're able to plan and execute for long term. You're not tied to VC money because they're going to have different set of goals than you might have at any given time. So you can actually execute your plan and develop on your own. And all the parties that are involved in managing the company have a hopefully similar goal. You don't have money from different ventures or different VCs that may have different requirements to exit, or different even government programs, for instance, that'll impose different restrictions on you, and you don't have those, so you can live without that. And it forces I think this is probably the key point, it forces a financial discipline onto you, because you first of all have to make something, make some revenue, then spend it, as opposed to having a bucket of money that you start working with. Not to say that doesn't have external discipline, but having earned something, then spend it, forces you to have much tighter financial discipline inherently, because you have no money unless you go sell something. And you can sell something, you can validate what you have. So in kind of, this approach is, while it's good with some of the good things you mentioned, also has a number of challenges. First of all, it's a very slow growth model, because your growth is limited by profit. So saying our story started in '86, and we launched our first product in '98, so it's already 14 years, and we slowly build up. And if any of the plans that Paul and John were mentioning, they'll be at this stage within 3 years. John was talking about, forget, $100 million in sales within 3 years, and it's totally feasible under that model. But it isn't in our model, because we have to do things that are lower risk, that have shorter development cycle, that can be launched in a quicker manner and sold in a quicker manner to generate revenue. So it has a kind of set of challenges imposed on you, and one of them is it is an inherently slower growth. The other one is that you lack the discipline imposed by external capital. So like for instance, in our case, my partner Frank, myself, in making all the decisions, we don't necessarily have the value or knowledge set that would come from external folks that may have done it many times. And because it's their money you're spending, they can keep a tight eye on you through board of directors and whatnot, and manage how you execute your plan. Okay, so they're going to force a set of discipline onto you that wasn't forced upon us, other than the fact that we had to go sell products. I think that could have helped us. Other thing that you lack is a lack of public profile, because we weren't necessarily out generating money, so you don't have access to the kind of public persona, which can get in the way at times.
It's the whole package. It's the technology, it's the management, it's the opportunity, it's how do you position yourself against all the competition, and how long is it going to take you to get there, and do you have a good plan. And that's what a VC's betting on. So you have to cover off every one of those things, and second-rate technologies can be very successful if they've got all the other pieces of the equation in place. And one of the things that VCs look for too is the management team capable. If this technology doesn't work out the way you initially had envisaged, which is most likely the case, because when you start off with a new technology, you don't really understand how it's going to be used in the hands of the practitioners who are going to use it. And if it doesn't work out the way you had planned, does this team have the ability to change and adapt and figure a way out to take all their skills and the technologies that they have developed and position them in a different way so they can be successful? So it's a matter of building a team that can do that. It's very important.
Okay. Thank you. I have a question. This is maybe rhetorical, but how much do VCs or investors, angels, care about the technology that's going to change the world, or how much do they care about the return on their investment?
That's actually not a facetious question. It would have been a while back, but it's not now. There's an evolving group, social capital and venture philanthropy, people who, for example, previously would have would have donated money to the Cancer Society or someone else to do basic research for various altruistic reasons, but also to get their name up on the side of the research institute or something like that. And they do it for tax benefits as well. But there's altruism driving that. There's some kind of maybe their family had cancer or something like that. But a trend is that people are seeing that those investments are not realizing the benefit. You invest in research to get an outcome at the patient or the physician level. And we've shown that there isn't necessarily as much of a flow from research to commercialization as we would like. So there are an increasing number of social capital organizations where people, philanthropists, are looking to invest in things that will have impact. And these impacts are typically for social good, not just for financial return. In fact, sometimes not for financial return at all. But we're actually trying to develop one right now that has a combination of social impact and venture return. But those returns are actually reinvested back in the fund to perpetuate the fund, rather than just doing philanthropic investment. So it's coming, but I wouldn't say it's widespread yet by any stretch of the imagination. But you know what? If you can't get a good return on the product and everything, I don't think necessarily we should be in the business of pursuing things that no one can derive benefit from, a business from. Otherwise, it's not sustainable.
I'm talking about early stage, to get over the hump.
Right. So that's where, that's where the social capital comes in. In other words, I'm investing to create social good. And governments have to play in that game, because the healthcare system, $46 billion healthcare system with no research and development arm in Ontario, for example, well, they have an obligation, and the Drummond Report has said so, they have an obligation to improve the health system and get a better value for money for Ontarians. So they have an obligation to bring some of the investment they're making in research through to commercialization. And they're just starting to get that, but it's not quite mature yet.
Any more questions? Well, if there are no more questions, well, we will thank the panel.